So in the previous lecture, we completed the setup for the distribution groups for both of our applications. And we've already seen how those people that we invite to those distribution groups can join them, where they will eventually see the builds that we release. So that is exactly what we're going to set up in this lecture. How is it that these new builds are going to be released automatically? After all, this has to be continuous delivery. As soon as we merge something into a branch, in our case, the test branch, that new build is already created. It is now up to us to set up the delivery. I am going to start in this lecture with the iOS project. And in fact, once that I have the group over here in the Distribute tab, the rest of the steps will have to be configured directly from the Build tab. Again, we're going to be working right now on the test branch. Now, before I go ahead and do this, I have to make sure that all of my code is already on the dev branch, which currently isn't. If you remember, over on our GitHub repository, we created a pull request and it has successfully built and the checks have passed, but I haven't merged yet. So this is what I wanted to just merge the pull request and confirm the merge. You know that the next step would be to create a pull request so we can merge everything from dev over to test. But here is where we don't have the complete setup just yet. We know that it would build, we've seen that before, we set that up previously, but it wouldn't be distributed yet, which is why back in App Center in the test branch, we have to configure how is it that it is going to be distributed. Now, because these new builds are going to be installed on actual devices, I need to change the configuration. It will no longer be a debug configuration. It has to be a release configuration. The SDK version can remain the same, so can the Xcode version. But what has to change is also the build type. We're no longer going to be building for simulators. We want this to run on devices, our testers' devices. So I will change this to be device build. Now, because we are now building for devices, we have to sign the build. This is going to be the important part in here. We know that we have set to build for devices now. We can leave the build number format to be automatically incremented, to build on every push, no environment variables, but we do have to sign the builds. Now, before I go ahead and explain how to do this, we're going to actually have to navigate away from App Center for a bit. I will enable this option to test on a real device. After all, this is an entirely free option that is enabled as soon as I select the device build. Because it can now actually be run in an actual device, App Center is going to run our application on a real device and let us know if the build works. It will simply launch the application. It won't do a lot of testing, but it will let us know if this works. And of course, since we're going to be enabling continuous delivery, we enable distribute builds. This right here, this option, is the one that enables continuous delivery. As soon as the build is ready, we're going to create a new release. Now, in this case, we're going to be using groups. Later on, we're going to configure the store as well. For now, I am going to be selecting that beta testers group that I created. Notice that I could also select the collaborators, but normally my collaborators group is just a team of developers, so we could all just run an application from the IDE, but you could also select them. Maybe even have this being distributed from the dev branch. Normally you don't do that, so I will just select beta testers from the test branch. And I will be able to save this. Of course, like I mentioned, first we have to sign the builds. This is the last step that we're going to be performing, and it's the one that is going to take a bit longer. Now notice that a certificate is being requested. We've actually already generated this one, a certificate for distribution that we generated back in the developer portal for Apple. In the certificate, you may remember how we already have this iOS distribution certificate. So actually we can just upload it directly from here. We already have that P12 file somewhere on our computer. Of course, just as it happened in one of the previous lectures when we uploaded the certificate to manage the devices, we will have to provide that certificate's password. But that's it for the certificate. Now the interesting file in here is going to be the provisioning profile. This provisioning profile is how Apple is going to identify our application. And that is why the identifier of the application should have always been a unique value. And that identifier was actually created as soon as we created the project over on Visual Studio. So let me navigate over to Visual Studio and show you. If we go over to our iOS project and open the info.plist file, you're going to find a bundle identifier that was generated with whatever you set as the identifier and the name of the application. This right here is going to identify the application as unique. This right here is the value that we can use to create that provisioning profile. And by the way, Visual Studio could do this automatically for certain builds, but we're going to be doing it directly from the Apple Developer Portal. So just as we created certificates, we can create profiles. And profiles are exactly those identifiers for our application and allow us to set a way to distribute this particular application through many different ways. Now, before I go ahead and create this profile, I will need that app identifier. So in the identifiers tab, I will create a new identifier for my app. So I will simply select that the identifier that I want to create is an app identifier. Select this one, click on continue, and in here is where I will have to set the bundle ID. So here to the right, I will simply paste that bundle ID that was set directly from Visual Studio and that has been used to build my application. My application is already identified through this bundle ID. Now notice that we do have explicit and wildcard options. Wildcard option is just a way to maybe set your identifier like this. So all of the apps that belong to you with this reverse domain can be used, but I will have to set an explicit bundle ID in this case. I will also set a quick description in here. I could optionally set some capabilities. I don't need any capabilities for this application, so I will just go ahead and click on continue. Double check that the bundle ID is correct and click on register. And there you go. Now in this list, you're going to find that identifier. We have the identifier right here. Now we can navigate over to profiles and create our profile. Our profile is going to be a distribution profile. We want our application to be distributed to other users. Eventually, we're going to be distributing to the App Store. Right now, we want an ad hoc distribution. To create a distribution provisioning profile to install our application on a limited number of registered devices. Again, those registrations are going to happen automatically through App Center, as we said in the lecture when we created a distribution group for our iOS project. So distribution and ad hoc. I will click on continue now, and here I have to select that app ID that I've just created. So this provisioning profile is going to be working for only one of our applications. So I select my application from this list of app IDs and click on continue. And now I have to select the certificate. In this case, because this is a distribution provisioning profile, this has to be a distribution certificate. But we've already created this one. Again, it is the same one that allowed us to create this P12 file. So I will just select it and click on continue. Finally, in here I can select from registered devices on which devices this is going to run. Eventually, App Center is going to help us register new devices automatically, as we said in the lecture that I mentioned, but you could set some already registered devices to be able to run this application. So I will select my own device from here and maybe my iPad as well. This is not required. Eventually, again, App Center is going to be registering the devices of our users when they try to install the application. So let's just click and continue. I will finally have to set a name for this provisioning profile and click on Generate. And that's it. We can just click on Download to download that mobile provision file. And if you navigate back to App Center, you can notice that it is exactly the type of file that App Center requires. So I will select that file that I've just downloaded, and that's it. I can save my build. Remember that we've set this as release, that we have set as device build, that we have set this build to be signed with those couple of files that we've uploaded, that we're going to be testing on a real device. But the most important thing here is that we're going to be releasing our app to the distribution group that we created earlier. So we click on Save. We're not yet going to be building, but now the next time that we merge into the test branch, that is going to be generated. So let's actually go ahead and do that already. I am going to navigate over to GitHub, and I am going to be creating a new pull request from the dev branch to the test branch. I will also change the name of this pull request to first release and create a pull request. Of course, we know that first the checks will have to pass. Those checks are already in place for our test branch. If I navigate to the test branch, we will see this new pull request build being executed. As soon as these tests pass, we will be able to merge. Now, as an administrator, I can already merge, but I will wait for the checks to pass. So let's just wait for them to pass so we can merge this pull request into test and see how is it that that new release is going to be created. So here my iOS build has just passed, and I will actually be able to explain what I wanted to explain just with this one. This build right here did happen on the test branch. However, this doesn't create a release because this was a pull request build. The one that generates the release is the build that gets triggered when we merge into the branch. Similar to the one that we have in here, which was an automatic build. That has to happen until we merge. And I could keep waiting for the Android one to pass or merge already this into the test branch. However, if I do that, sure, my iOS project is going to create a release, but my Android project is not yet going to do that. So before actually merging into test, I'm going to go ahead and configure the release for the test branch for my Android project as well. So that is exactly what we're going to do in the next lecture. In this one, we've already set that up for iOS. We've already started a pull request. There are some builds that we have just seen do not generate any releases. So in the next lecture, once we have configured the release from the test branch for our Android project, we're finally going to be merging this pull request into test and see how those two releases, one for Android and one for iOS, are going to be created.